What's the deal with Jerry Seinfeld's board game collection on the classic hit 90s sitcom Seinfeld?
Hey everyone, this is Jonathan speaking, not Jerry Seinfeld. Sorry if you were fooled. I'm here today to talk to you about Jerry Seinfeld's board game collection as depicted on the television program Seinfeld. Over the course of its 9 seasons, board games were featured a couple of times as important plot elements, like Kramer and Newman's extended game of Risk, and of course the infamous game of Trivial Pursuit with the Bubble Boy. Seinfeld is arguably the greatest sitcom of all time, but something that's changed my recent viewings of the show is the fact that Seinfeld is now available for viewing in widescreen and HD. This means that we can all enjoy the antics of Kramer and the gang in greater detail than ever before, even with my extensive DVD collection. By the way, Seinfeld was originally framed and composed for the 4:3 aspect ratio, and then later converted to 16:9 aspect ratio for the purposes of high definition. However, they didn't do a great job taking care to convert this as some other shows have done in the past, and as a result, many scenes are actively obstructed, and it goes against the original director's. Anyway, as I've been watching Seinfeld reruns in HD with greater frequency, I've been noticing more and more background details that previously would have been harder to make out, such as various props in Jerry's apartment, his animal-themed oven mitts, his bizarre collection of fridge magnets, his VHS tapes, which include such hits as The Crying Game and Child's Play 2. But what I want to go over in excruciating detail is his collection of tabletop games, or at any rate, which games the set dressers decided would look good on the shelf in the back of his fake apartment. Now, the items on these shelves in the background do shift slightly over time. In the early seasons, there's nothing there at all. Later on, the only games there are some generic editions of chess and checkers and a jigsaw puzzle of some kind. But by the time you get to season 7, Jerry's collection of games was more or less solidified. Apparently he's not a Kallax guy, by the way. And so, the games that we can see on Jerry Seinfeld's shelf are as follows: Scrabble, Taboo, Battleship, Clue, Monopoly, New York City Edition, Jenga, Yahtzee, Rummy Cube, and Adverteasing 2. Yes, you heard me correctly. Adverteasing 2. Just to be clear, these items here are not board games. They appear to be Adobe Acrobat guidebooks or something. Has Jerry ever used this computer? All right, now let's get one thing out of the way. Obviously, Jerry wasn't an avid board game collector. I don't see him as the type to frequent BoardGameGeek.com or to tune into the Dice Tower's latest Top 10 video. The Settlers of Catan was released in 1995, and Seinfeld went off the air in 1998. This all took place just before the big hobbyist board game craze began to take off in earnest in the United States. As such, it's not too surprising that Jerry's board games consist of what we might favorably refer to as the classics. You're not going to see Kramer accidentally trip and knock a copy of Wingspan off the shelf, and George is never going to explain his latest work-related troubles over a prolonged session of Twilight Imperium. That being said, which games are we working with? And more importantly, do they actually make sense? Are they consistent with Jerry's character as depicted on the show, or are they incongruent with his personality? Let's examine them more closely. First, Scrabble. This one, I believe. In fact, this word-based tile placement game is featured in a Season 1 episode, in which Jerry is seen playing a game against his mother, and Kramer suggests she use the word quone, which Jerry doesn't believe exists in the Scrabble dictionary, but which I think is a perfectly cromulent word. Jerry, of course, is a lover of words, a lover of language, and this incident seems very much in keeping with his personality. Hey, imagine if Jerry was dating a girl and she used an illegal Scrabble word. Man, if they ever do a reboot, they should use that. That's a funny idea. Now, Taboo. This is the game in which you have to get someone to guess a word without saying certain other words that would be the obvious clues. I'm not so sure about this one. I think it's too much of a goofy party game for Jerry. Sure, he loves to laugh, but I think he'd find this one too corny, and he'd probably get stuck playing with people who don't understand the rules and cause his team to lose. Just too stressful. Battleship, another classic standby, ostensibly a battle of wits, in reality more reliant on luck, or fate, which is the more sophisticated way to say luck. This one is 100% legit. Just like with Scrabble, we do get to see some actual battleship action on the show when Jerry faces off against Elaine in season 9. In this scene, Jerry derives great satisfaction from forcing Elaine to make a sound effect after effectively sinking her submarine. Again, it's legit, and I think Jerry definitely enjoys playing Battleship as long as he's winning. Next, we have Clue, which might be one of the more complex games in this set. The classic murder mystery deduction puzzle would have Jerry struggling to uncover the contents of the hidden envelope while fielding devious questions from the likes of, say, Newman? Imagine his dismay when the envelope's contents are revealed, proving his theory wrong, causing him to utter under his breath, "Mustard." He's probably played this one 2 or 3 times, but I don't think it's a real favorite. Monopoly New York City Edition. This one's a gimme. New York is a big part of the show. I'd say it's practically a character in its own right, and everybody ends up with a copy of Monopoly on their shelves at one point or another, whether they like it or not. It's conceivable that someone might have gifted this to Jerry, or maybe he picked it up at the airport on his way back from a comedy tour as something to amuse friends visiting from out of state. But if I had to guess, I'd say that like most people with a copy of Monopoly at the back of their closet, he has never taken it out of the box. Jenga. This is another one that I think Jerry would just be annoyed by. Pieces are falling all over the place, everybody's touching the blocks with their unclean hands. Just a disaster from all angles. Big miss on this one. Yahtzee, on the other hand, I think this one is a valid pick. It's simple, and it has the feel of a classic gambling game, so Jerry could sit around and smoke a few cigars with the gang while playing and relax. Also, like Battleship, I think anything that's heavily luck-dependent is going to end up in Jerry's favor. It should be noted that George also has a copy of Yahtzee in his apartment, making this perhaps the only shared game in their collections. Wow. The sole winner of the Spiel des Jahres German Board Game Award in Jerry's collection is Rummy Cube, a tile-laying game based on the gameplay of Gin Rummy. Not a terrible selection, but for some reason I don't buy it. This one's a little too boring, feels like it would be more at home in the Florida residence of Morty and Helen Seinfeld. Maybe he picked it up to occupy them in case they stopped by. And lastly, that leaves us with Advertising 2. If you're like me, this is the only game on this list that you've never heard of before. It's a sequel, apparently. And if I had to guess, I'd say it's a wacky take on advertising? Like a party game version of Mad Men? Well, according to Board Game Geek, Advertising 2 is a trivia game based on product marketing. It has players trying to answer questions about slogans and logos of various products and corporate brand names. I guess Jerry is pretty familiar with pop culture, so maybe he'd be good at this one, but why? Who played this game? Was it ever popular? Apparently, it was at least popular enough to merit a sequel. This one just has me confused as to how and why it ended up on the set of Seinfeld, or how it got made at all. I don't know, maybe if they ever make Advertising 3, it'll turn me around. And those are all of the board games on Jerry Seinfeld's shelf. Overall, I think they did a decent job with this selection. It's not perfect, but it's not that outlandish to imagine that Jerry might have owned these games, even if he didn't play them all that often. Had the show Seinfeld taken place, say, 10 years later, might we have seen Catan, Ticket to Ride, or Pandemic up there? Maybe Apples to Apples, or Cards Against Humanity. I don't get the sense that Jerry Seinfeld or Larry David, real-life co-creators of the show, had any strong feelings about these games one way or another. More likely, a member of the crew was tasked with making the set feel more lived in, and that's what they came up with. It's worth noting that there were a couple of pop-up Seinfeld experiences where they recreated Jerry's apartment for fans to explore in real life. I found photos from 2 different instances of this experience, and both featured different sets of games, some from the actual show, some that they just made up. I mean, guess who? Really, people? This is not canon. Veering somewhat closer to the realm of canon, however, is this, the remade set of Seinfeld put together for the 7th season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, in which Larry David, playing himself, puts on a Seinfeld reunion in the fictional universe of that show. And yes, as part of that fictional remake of a fictional set, there was a selection of board games on that back shelf, again, wildly different from what was seen on the original show. There is one holdover there in the form of Scrabble, but after that, everything just goes crazy. We've got Parcheesi and Sorry, which are more or less the same bad game. Neither one makes an appearance on Seinfeld, although Newman says he played Parcheesi with an old blind man once. There's Concentration, the new 22nd edition, apparently. Concentration is like this puzzle memory game. It was a game show. I don't know. Down at the bottom, we've got Stratego, essentially an advanced version of the gameplay in Battleship, so I could see that one making its way onto the shelf. And oh yeah, you probably noticed I skipped over the official Beakman's World game, also known as Beakmania. Based on the kids' science show from the 90s, you know, the one with the guy in the rat suit, the one that wasn't Bill Nye. I really don't know if there's a link between Seinfeld and Beakman's World, other than the fact that they both aired in the same decade, and Beakman bears a passing resemblance to Kramer, so I have to assume that this was just a random find from an antique shop or somebody's attic. I don't know that I can rate any of these fake Curb Seinfeld board games in terms of their plausibility. I still have to consider these non-canon ultimately, but I do think that if a Seinfeld reunion happened for real, this is a pretty close approximation of what that crew might find to populate that shelf, since they probably wouldn't be poring over frames of episodes with board games in them like some kind of a psychopath. I also don't want to close this video out without mentioning the episode where Jerry's brain played chess with Jerry's penis. Remember that? Remember when that happened? Huh. That's all for this look at Jerry Seinfeld's board game collection. Stay tuned for my next video where I'll be dissecting George Costanza's cassette tapes. They're miniature people, so we call them meeples. Why not? Miniatures. People that are miniature. Miniatures. That could have been a name for the meeple. You could have called them teeples. Tiny peoples. Meeples. Now, meeple, that's the plural of meeple. I never heard of a merson. Have you ever opened up a box and looked at a merson? I don't think so.